Hello, everyone. Welcome to another episode of the Pure Kino podcast. I'm Kino, joined as always by Mac. And how you doing this week, Mac?
Not bad. I kind of totally forgot Halloween was coming up. So when I started to see all I was like on HBO Max, we were looking for something to watch, and there was like scary movie collection, and I'm like, why are all these pop?
It's
I'm like, oh yeah, shit, Halloween's in like 4 days. I
coming up, yeah.
of like for
It's
the
on a
big Christmas and Thanksgiving, that's fine, but for everything else, I kind of like lose track personally. So
yeah. This time it's on a Monday, which kind of sucks because, like, you know, if you were gonna go out and party or whatever, you could do it on a Monday night. Although I think most people are gonna do it on like Saturday or Friday. Like I'm going out on Friday, but I don't even think I'm gonna dress up. I thought about maybe dressing up as Paulie from The Sopranos. I have a tracksuit, and all I would need to kind of do is like get the white hair paint and like do the wings like he does. I thought that'd be kind of
get those
funny.
wingtips. Hell yeah.
Yeah, I don't know because I don't feel like anyone else is gonna dress up. So I don't want to be the only asshole there, like in costume. But we'll see.
But
We'll see.
then you can just lie and say you're not in costume.
Yeah, this is just how I look. Yeah,
Yeah, this is what I wear every day. Come
and
on.
just start doing the affectations out of nowhere. Be like, hey, watch it.
Yeah, no one will know. This is just how he
Drink
acts.
drinks over here.
They probably have never seen The Sopranos, so they're like, "What the fuck is this guy
Yeah, that's
doing?"
the other thing is
Don't worry
most people
about it.
probably wouldn't even get it. They'd be like, oh yeah, this is just like some asshole guy in a tracksuit.
Yeah, why not? They'll never know.
Are you gonna do anything for Halloween?
I think my friend's having a party, but probably not. I am working the bar tomorrow and Saturday night, so I wonder if we're gonna get a lot of people in costumes and shit. Because it's because yeah, people would be celebrating it this weekend, not next weekend. I assume because it's on a Monday. I would assume so.
Yeah, it should be pretty fun to see everyone like there and stuff, and assuming they don't go too crazy. There's times when people like you know on these like party holidays they just go like out of control. So
Hmm.
hopefully that doesn't happen. But I'm gonna try to be heading to like some chill bar, just to hang out because I don't know about you. I don't like being part of the huge crowds when stuff like this is going on because that's when all the fights break out. That's when the shootings happen or whatever. And I want to be as far away from that as possible.
Yeah, we'll see. We'll see how it goes.
Yeah. But yeah, so this week, a number of things happened. Personally, for me, I finished the Breaking Bad logs finally, which
I
has
saw
been
that. Nice.
awesome. I am
Yeah, you were
so
churning. You were
freaking
churning them out.
happy
You were like,
to.
"Let's get these done with, bro."
I am so freaking happy to be done with those. It's taken a whole year to get through them, and I told myself last time that I was like, I'm not doing another like where like I do like a month of solid videos because to get those all ready for the month ahead of time is just such a pain in the ass. And then what do I end up doing? I do the exact same thing again. So, but it's been awesome to get that done. And Monday on October 31st, I have my El Camino review coming out. I told you a little bit about that here and there,
Oh yeah,
but
you're
uh,
like so proud. Yeah.
yeah, special little project coming out that I'm really excited about. So hopefully people like it, and but we'll see.
Nice. What's your next project coming up?
The next major project is The Wire. That's what I'm going to take on next. But I'm gonna give
Nice.
myself some time in between now and then. Like I have a bunch of videos I'm working on, but they're just kind of like random like video essay kind of stuff. I need a little bit of a break before I dig into like I'm committing to basically another year dedicated to one topic because The Wire, man. It's like there is so much to explore with that series. Like I had to dedicate an entire year just to focusing on that.
I was gonna say it's a very dense show. So
Yeah.
each episode that you're going to, because yeah, you kind of like explain the plot of each episode. So you're gonna have to like each one's gonna be probably longer. Because Breaking Bad it's a very not in a bad way. It's a very slow paced show
Yeah.
where like not a lot happens
Hmm.
in each episode.
Yeah.
Not I don't mean to say that as like a bad thing. It's a good
No.
thing because it like really takes its time. But it's a lot easier to like. I think I remember reading a couple of the Breaking Bad scripts, and I was surprised of like, wow, this like 45 or 50-page script only has like 10 scenes,
Yeah.
and it's because it really takes its
Yeah.
time. But yeah, with The Wire, it's like, oh my god, each episode is dense as fuck.
Well, Breaking Bad is so focused too. Like it's all about Walt and occasionally a little bit about Jesse or Hank or someone, but all the focus is on Walt, so it's tied directly to him. Whereas The Wire, even these one-off little characters who maybe just have one scene, that scene's important and it contributes to something that's going to happen later on. And the themes that it goes across like dozens of characters per season that you like it's really hard to tackle. So like I said, it's going to be a huge project, but I am excited because like we said, we both love that show. The Wire's just incredible.
Nice. It's funny because that you mentioned that about it being very focused, because currently I am doing another watch through of The Shield, because that's what my next
A lot of
long
people
form
recommended that
videos.
show to me.
Yeah, it's my next long form video, and about halfway through season 5 now on my rewatch. And what I realized was that Breaking Bad, in retrospect, I mean, like there have been other shows that didn't do this, like 24 to some extent, but Breaking Bad was, at least for me, the first show I can think of that kind of did away with the episodic format, in the sense of The Wire. Actually, I should say The Wire did it first, but at least for me, I was exposed to it more with Breaking Bad, in the sense where each episode, each season, and kind of the series as a whole, it plays out like one giant movie. The Shield, as much as the like um there are a lot of serialized elements, especially as the seasons go on and it gets deeper into it. I think the final season is like far more serialized, because of when it came out, 2002 to 2008, I believe. Um, it still relied a lot on, like, the episodic nature of a lot of television before The Sopranos and The Wire and the golden age of television. And for that reason, it doesn't, it in many ways is still ahead of its time, but in many ways it has sort of aged, just simply due to the customs at the time of how, hey, each episode has to have its own little self-contained story, and it's like, nowadays that a lot of TV doesn't really go for that anymore. So, sometimes like sitcoms and like more like that, but like more like high end drama, not so much.
Well, that can be very refreshing, though. Like I said, like having that smaller focus and again, not necessarily trying to tell like a huge story across all the seasons, but just focused on the minute by minute action. It can be really well done. I think Sopranos is a little bit more to that end too.
Hmm.
They do have stuff that crosses between a lot of different episodes, but it seemed to be not about telling a huge story, but like telling the story of one particular thing in each episode. And I honestly like that. I think it's very refreshing to see when shows do that because it has swung completely in the opposite way for again, like we said, a lot of shows.
Well, it's interesting because with The Sopranos, I realized that Sopranos, especially in the later seasons, it still was episodic to an extent. It obviously it did have like heavily serialized elements, but it was episodic. However, that episodic nature was focused around characterization. Like, most of it was built around a particular character or Tony himself. Whereas The Shield, I'm rewatching it, and a lot of the episodic nature of the show, like especially the characters of Dutch and Claudette, the two detectives, they kind of have their own little side adventures. And often, many times, it doesn't really have anything to do with what's going on with Vic and the strike team, which is kind of like the juice of the show. And because for that reason, it's kind of, especially in the last few seasons, where like the fallout from the strike team, where like the chickens come home to roost, and they start to like face retribution for what they've done. It really does slow the show down, because you're like, hey, this is like really building up, and it's like, oh, let's cut to I actually think that now that I'm rewatching it, I think the Shield's final run is superior to Breaking Bad, to Sopranos, to a lot of shows. However, I think it is let down a bit by the episodic nature that it still kind of existed in.
Yeah, I heard a lot of people say a lot of great things about the Shield. Again, that kind of anti-hero protagonist. I haven't seen the show, but I've picked up that, like, again, it's a very complicated and main character that does a lot of bad things too. So that definitely be on my list one day. And like I said, if you do a long form video, I'd be excited. I wanted to tell you I watched your leftovers video, which again, I mentioned before, I haven't seen the leftovers, but you recapped it in such a way for me that I felt like I got the main points that you were going to discuss here, and the problems that you discussed with it, and the good things that it did seemed to me, I could understand them in a way that, even though I haven't seen the show, I was like, oh, what you're saying makes sense. So congratulations on that video, man. I know that was a huge thing you've been working on for a while.
Well, thank you. I know it. I'm glad you say that because that was my biggest concern. Because in my other videos, like my Last of Us one, I kind of like I took the time to like explain the plot. But for this, I was like, I don't know if I want to do that. I'll probably just hopefully it'll come across in the while I'm discussing it. But the narrative is so I don't want to say complex, but it's so like random at times. Like it's so like all over the place that I left a lot of stuff out for the sake of time and clarity. But thank you. I'm glad that was very reassuring.
Well, I think that, like, a lot of people, they like, I've got criticisms on a lot of my videos to be like, why do you like recap like the plot or whatever that happened when, of course, if we're watching, we know what happened. And I like, that's not always true. And your video is a great example of that, which is, I've not seen the show. I want to hear what you're talking about, but I need a little bit of like explanation. Not everything. You said, of course, you leave a lot of things out, and I do that with my videos too. I don't include every single beat of action, but giving that kind of plot summary for people who have not, maybe not watched it, or maybe they watched it a long time ago and they don't remember every single little detail of the thing. So I think providing that is helpful for a lot of people, even though there's some people who are like, I know what happens on the show, I don't need you to, fucking recap it. Well, that part's not for you.
Yeah, and I don't really mind that. However, I will say it from a writing standpoint, it really does it does feel like almost sort of like a pill you have to swallow in the sense of like because I did that with the Last of Us Part 2 video where I would take before I start each section, I would recap the entire plot. But while I was writing, I got so bored with it. Like it's because you're just recapping stuff that probably a good percentage of your audience probably knows if they're watching the video. And sometimes I do it for my own sake. I kind of have to like track, oh yeah, this is what happened. I just want to make sure. But I think if I nowadays I try to do it more organically, like while you're talking about it, kind of fill in the gaps to kind of give the gist of what is going on.
I agree. That's a great way to do it. And I agree that having that information in there helps me from a writing standpoint too, which is, again, reminding yourself what happened, but also I think it gives it some structure to your analysis. Like, I think, video essays, we call them video essays because, again, they're essentially essays. And when we wrote those in school, you would give a little bit of a recap, even though your professor, whatever, knows what happened in the book because they're judging your essay. But just providing that structure, I think, lends itself well to analysis because you're providing evidence most of the time with your explanations too. It's not just saying what happened, but you're saying what happened in preparation for the arguments that you're going to make, and it sets it up in a very organic way. At least I think it does. Again, everyone could do it a different way, and there's definitely ways to do it better. But yeah, like I said, I think you did a great job with that, man, and yeah, I look forward to a lot more long form content from you in the future.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna focus on that for the time being, just because I enjoy it more in the big projects. Um, However, just to kind of rewind, just because you mentioned it, and it's interesting because I've heard about this a little bit from So The Shield came out in 2002. Now, so obviously, like for those familiar with the show, or those not familiar, it tells the story of Vic Mackey and his strike team. They're cops in LA, and they're like very crooked. Like not like evil, but like they like do some like pretty heinous shit throughout the like I'm rewatching it and I'm like, holy shit, they just like I was actually surprised how far the show goes in terms of what it has them actually do. Um Now, what's interesting was that the show was developed so obviously it came out in 2002, so it was being written and developed in 2001. Now, come 9/11, apparently the producers of the show were very scared because following 9/11, they were afraid of showing because shows before, and this is kind of lead into what I wanted to talk to you about. Shows in the past had shown cops in a somewhat negative light, like Dirty Harry back in the 70s. But coming into the 90s, there wasn't it really like the whole like crooked cop thing wasn't like super common, especially on TV, because you had stuff like Law and Order, uh, where it maybe kind of showed the cops kind of a little bit, but for the most part, it was pretty sympathetic to them. And then there was even The Wire, I feel like, is pretty overall like for the most part the cops are the good guys even if they are shown to be flawed. Whereas The Shield was a show where it was like, oh no, these are these are the bad guys, that like the main character is a guy you're gonna not want to root for. And so yeah, the studio panicked, but luckily they were like, you know what, let's just go with it, and eventually it turned out well. But the reason I wanted to bring that up was that so there's a term out there that's thrown out around a lot in terms of media, and it's known as Copaganda, which is basically the idea that television shows often will, especially shows about police officers, whether it's Law and Order, Wire, whatever, will frame police officers in a very sympathetic light, but to the extent where it almost comes off as a little bit sanctimonious, where it almost comes off as like we're freedom fighters and are the only thing standing in the way of chaos in this city, and we're the good guys taking on the bad guys. Which, and this isn't like, I don't mean to say this is like all cops are bastards or anything like that. However, I think a lot of these shows don't really discuss. There's sort of almost like a lack of accountability in terms of discussing the structures the cops exist in that don't hold them accountable for when they do, misbehave or, act without misconduct. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on the term and how it exists in media today.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I talked about 9/11 in a video I did about The Sopranos and how it absolutely had an effect on The Sopranos, but also media in general. The kind of age of fear we were living in during that point. A lot of shows, again, like 24 and stuff, started popping up
Oh
around
yeah,
this
24.
idea that like law enforcement agencies, the army, all this kind of stuff, they're there to protect us from these unseen threats and forces. Now, I need to be careful that I don't. I try to as a online critic persona to divorce like my opinions from media versus my opinions on real life. I'll just admit that I have family in law enforcement and stuff like that, so that kind of colors my real life perception on this stuff. I'm not an expert on it. I don't want to talk out of my ass on that kind of stuff. But in terms of media, you're absolutely right in the sense that shows like The Wire, the cops are absolutely the good guys, even though they do stuff that's very reprehensible. Like Presbalewski in season one takes a kid's eye out from hitting him with his gun, which is very very illegal. What he did there, cops are not allowed to do that. And he's never held accountable for that. He gets held accountable later for like killing another cop accidentally, and he gets a redemption arc with being a teacher, which is not a it's not a bad thing per se. I didn't hate Presbalewski. I felt a lot of sympathy for him. But yeah, he's not held accountable in any kind of way. And it's funny looking at shows like The Wire compared to We Own This City, which was the miniseries that came out with David Simon earlier this year, I believe. And it's like, yeah, our perceptions on cops in the media and like what they can get away with, and like this kind of whole like they can do whatever they have to do even if it's illegal in order to get the bad guys. That shit like doesn't fly in media nearly as much anymore, especially because of a lot of the real life events that have gone on. Again, I'm not an expert in real life stuff, I'm not giving my opinions on that kind of stuff, but the media is absolutely a reflection of that.
Absolutely. And yeah, with The Wire, it's hard because as much as the show did show it's difficult because the show did, like, obviously, like, the big theme of the show is, like, systemic dysfunction and
Yeah.
how but in this case, the systemic dysfunction was more focused around how the systems in place prevent the cops from doing their jobs
Yeah.
properly. Which, to some extent, I do think that is correct. I think there
Yeah.
are a lot of roadblocks in that sense. However, I think one thing the show didn't touch upon and did kind of gloss over, especially in the last season, where McNulty kind of goes off the rails
Mm-hmm.
and starts doing some like pretty, no spoilers, of course, but like when he starts doing some pretty like crazy shit
Yeah.
off the books, it never really feels like the show is like holding them accountable. Like it almost
No.
feels like it's always like, yeah, this is fine. Like, it
Yeah.
never really discusses like, hey, like there's even a scene in um there's even a scene in the first season where Kima, after the cops are like doing a raid on the projects, and
Mm.
one of the cops gets pushed over, and then
Yeah.
Kima comes
I
over
love
and just
that
starts
scene. Yeah.
kicking the
Yeah.
shit out of him. And
Yeah.
it never really seems like it never really kind of addresses that, where it's like it
Yeah.
never
No.
really takes. And now you could say it's like, well, they're never really taking a side on it, but then at the same time it's like, yeah, but at some points it does kind of feel like the cops are almost raised to like a much more heroic status, even more so than like some other shows, I would say.
Yeah. It's definitely implied that like everything the cops are doing, even when it's bad, is for the greater good.
Hmm.
Now, of course, there are some examples of like bad police on that show, like Officer Walker, who's like the crooked cop who like breaks that kid's finger and stuff like that. And there's a bunch of shitty cops on there as well that those are arguments against the cops being this perfect picture. But definitely all of our main cast and such, it's implied that like if they were let off the leash, if they didn't have any kind of regulations or any of this bullshit they go through, they would get the bad guys, which I think is a little bit of a simplification of um, how crime and stuff works. Not to say that like I'm 100% like yeah defund the police, or I'm not for that at all. Like there are monsters out there that we see on the wire and in real life that need to be stopped, that prey on people. But it's funny. The Wire. I'm reading David Simon's book, The Corner, right now. He co-wrote with Ed Burns, the other creator of The Wire. And it's funny in some ways. The Wire is a little bit of an oversimplification of a concept for me after reading this book, because and that sounds so funny because we were so used to The Wire being like, oh, it's so complex what The Wire does, it's so nuanced, all this kind of stuff. But The Corner really is about all the stuff that The Wire deals with, the dysfunction of society in the school systems, in law enforcement, and all this kind of stuff. But because it's a book, it has a little bit even more room to breathe than The Wire does. So I really enjoying reading that book, and it does shed a lot of light on the deeper problems beyond just like the cops' inability to just take these criminals down.
Yeah, absolutely. Even yeah, Law and Order never really did that. I can't. It's funny because like when I was doing research for the Shield, I can't really think of what are some other like crooked cop shows. Like I
Like
don't know. I
dedicated
can't.
to just crooked cops. Like I couldn't
Or
think of one.
yeah, or like where it's like the more like that's like the main focus, and it's weird because I was
We Own
like,
This City. That's that miniseries that just came out, David Simon. That's
oh
dedicated
yeah,
entirely. But you're right. In terms of like mainstream shows, No, and again, part of that might be a little bit due to the nature of a television show, which is we have to follow these guys. We have to, in some ways, root for them. Just like on Breaking Bad, even though Walt's the villain, we still are made to feel sympathetic for him. And so any show that's going to deal with cops is going to want to make them sympathetic, and make them, ultimately closer to the good guys than just villains. But yeah, like definitely during the time period you brought up with 9/11, there was this big kind of fear of the unknown and a desire to kind of put our faith in our government institutions that we don't, like I said, we don't have that same kind of feeling, or most people don't have that same kind of feeling today.
Absolutely. It's funny because I actually wonder if, in part, so like going back to the Shield, they were talking about how they were afraid the show wouldn't take off because of, or people wouldn't be receptive to it because showing a cop in that sort of light, Vic Mackey, like even from like the opening scene has him like brutalizing a suspect and him and his team. However, what was interesting was that I think in some way it actually the the um the shadow of 9/11 actually almost helped the show in a way. That's kind of a weird way to put it. But what I mean is that after 9/11, particularly, in October of the passing of the Patriot Act, there was this sort of, a lot of people were like, there was this debate going on about like what what freedoms are we willing to sacrifice, or what are we willing to allow the violation of others' rights if it allows us to be safe. And that is kind of what the Shield is all about. Like at the beginning, it's all about part of the reason we are okay with Vic Mackey. We're kind of on his side. It's because the people he is hunting are like he's hunting like literally the worst of the worst. Like that show gets brutal. Like rapists, child molesters, like drug dealers, like murderers, like the worst of the worst. And so I think because of that, especially in the time period it came out, we almost are a bit more sympathetic to him because we're like almost as like in as a collective nation, we were like, yeah, like get those guys. Like even if you have to like bend the rules, get those guys. And yet, while the show may have leaned on that a little bit, come season 4 or 5, like right around the midway, the show does it slowly subverts that, where it almost starts to turn on Vic a little bit, or rather not, I shouldn't say turn on Vic, but it almost like it starts to like kind of like get the audience to snap out of it, to be like, hey, these guys that you've been following, these are not good guys, even if like you kind of understood why they did this or even agree with it. They are not good guys, and they have to pay for what they've done.
Yeah. Well, it's like Walt in Breaking Bad, where it's like in the beginning,
Hmm.
you're like, yeah, I sympathize with this. He's doing it for his family. He's reclaiming, his identity and his masculinity, all this kind of stuff. But over the course of the series, you realize that he's just taking it way too far. His motivations are not pure. They're self-centered, and it's not for their greater good. And again, you can say the same thing about Sopranos too. We start out in the beginning with Tony, for the most part, sympathizing him with the first few seasons and being like, yeah, he's dealing with some awful people and he does some bad things occasionally, but he's still compared to everyone else a really good guy. But as the series goes on and on, you're like, oh, the rot in your soul goes deeper than I first kind of thought. Again, I still have sympathy for Tony by the end, but definitely got major problems there. So I think Shield probably goes along with that same kind of line of storytelling.
Absolutely, and especially with Breaking Bad, I think even putting the family stuff aside, because you and I both agree that even from the beginning for Walter, it really wasn't truly about that. It was more about, like you said, like reclaiming his masculinity, reclaiming his sense of power, wanting to live like an exciting life before he dies. Even though those can be said to be somewhat selfish motives for the things he does, I almost think that like a lot of people can still sympathize with that. I remember my sister, she called me when she started watching Breaking Bad, and they were just in the first season, and she was like, "Yeah, the first episode works so well, and the reason it's able to, um, you know, the reason the show is able to, you know, allow the audience to root for Walter as long as they did." And this is ironically, it's something that I might even consider a flaw if like just like, set in isolation. But it's because the show makes Walter in the first episode so fucking pathetic and sympathetic. Like they kick the crap out of him. That scene where he's at the car wash and he's cleaning the guy's rims, and it's the bully from the school and with the Stacy, and it's like, oh my god, this is so over the top. But it works because the show is almost like lulling you into like a false sense of security of, hey, like, hey, you really want to feel for this guy, and you're like, absolutely. And it's like, okay, let's see how long that good grace lasts you. And you and I have talked about this, for a lot of fans, it kind of never wore off. There were a lot of, especially younger male fans who still look at him like, you know, no, he was totally right. And it's like, I think that's you went a little bit too overboard, but
And again, it's not like, I don't want the message to be like living life on your own terms is bad, or wanting to live powerfully or live masculine. That's not necessarily a bad thing. But the problem with Wall that we keep bringing up again and again is that he took his like desires way too far. It became like this really toxic thing where, even again, like scenes like that scene with Skylar where she's just trying to get him to like quit for his safety because she loves him, and he turns it into this thing where she's like attacking him, and he responds very badly to it. That's why it's toxic. It's not that living your life on your own terms, starting a business, trying to start an empire, that's not inherently bad. But the way that Walt went about it and his motivations and stuff, that's why it was bad, and it ultimately was not healthy for him or his family, and it destroyed his family at the end. So but you're right. A lot of people don't get that, and they just kind of cling to the cool aspect, which Breaking Bad is cool. I'm not gonna lie. Breaking Bad's a fucking cool show. I like watching Walt blow shit up and kill people. Like it's fun. It's a gangster show. But the deeper meaning is there for those fans who want to apply some kind of critical analysis to it. In the same way that The Sopranos was fun as a mafia show. It was fun to watch Tony beat the shit out of people. But there was some deeper character stuff going on behind the scenes there.
it's funny that you mentioned that particular scene, that I am the one who knocks scene, because I remember when I first watched the show, and like, the memes around it, it was always framed as like this, like, oh yeah, this is like an epic moment, where he like epic speech, like badass. And now I rewatch the scene, and it's just this scrawny dude yelling at his wife in his bedroom. It's
Yeah,
like
his shirt's like oversized to make Bryan Cranston appear smaller than he is. Actually, very, he's tall. He's got some mass to him, but he always wore oversized clothes on the show to make himself look scrawnier than he actually is.
is that like an actual design choice by the
Yeah, because I
that's
mean, yeah, I
awesome.
mean he's a regular guy, but they make him look very weak physically on the show, which I thought was very impressive. Um, and you're right, that scene in particular, it's so clear to me on rewatches that that's not supposed to be something powerful. Say my name. That speech is kind of powerful and kind of badass, but it's because he's saying it to a criminal, a gangster. That's an appropriate scene for him to be in the Heisenberg mode. But talking to your wife like
He's
that
just
and
yelling
bullying
at her.
her is not fucking okay. That's people don't fucking understand that.
And it's funny too, because there's a little moment, and I think Bryan Cranston understood this. I would love to get my hands on the script, because the writers in the scripts I've read, they're very they're the scene descriptions are very like on the nose, but
Yeah,
it's fun. It's like a lot of
yeah.
like, it's very cool. Um, there's a little moment right after he says, "I'm the one who knocks." He almost like, there's this moment where he has like a beat where like he kind of doesn't really know what to do,
Yeah,
where he kind of like he kind of goes and he kind of like
yeah,
looked away, almost like he acted tough for like 10 seconds, but then had
yeah,
nothing to back it up and just left.
yeah.
It was, I think
No, it's
that was like brilliant on Bryan Cranston's part.
it's such bullshit too what he's saying, because literally a few episodes before he was complaining to Saul, being like, Gus is gonna fucking kill me, like Jesse doesn't care, my wife doesn't care, blah blah blah. And now when Skylar brings it up, he's like, I can fucking, kill anyone I want to. I'm, Heisenberg. So what he was saying was a lie to himself, but it was just like you said, it was a reaction. And then when he has, I know exactly the beat you're talking about. He like looks away for a second and like he's like, and he just goes to shower because he's like, what the fuck did I just do? And you can see when he comes out of the shower too, he's ready to be like, hey, I'm sorry, like I just kind of reacted that way. And I will say that's a very human thing to do. I've been in situations like that where someone says something that offended me, and I just kind of went off on them, and then later I was like, I probably shouldn't have said that. It's like I just overreacted a little bit. My defenses were up, and I reacted badly. So it's not like he's completely inhuman. That's a big part of what makes Walter appealing, is that we have a lot of the same flaw. Most people have a lot of the same flaws that he does. He just had an outlet for it that a lot of us don't, which was making meth and killing people.
It's bullshit too, because he's not even the one. Like what he's referring to is Gail's that
Gail's murder,
spoilers.
yeah.
Yeah, he's referring to Gail's murder. He isn't even the one who shot him.
Yeah, I know. Jesse is. Walt never wins a fight in the entire series, unless it's through trickery, which I thought was a very cool detail. Like everyone he steps up to kicks his ass. Mike, Jesse, everyone, and he manages to win usually, but it's through outsmarting his opponents. He's not a physical threat as much as he wants to be.
It's it's funny that you mentioned that, because I remember when I've actually seen some retrospective reviews from, well, not like from like actual critics, but like some fans, and they complained that they were upset that in the season 4 finale, the way the way that Walt takes down Gus wasn't in some like climactic standoff. And it's like, well, yeah, because that wouldn't make any sense. He would get fucking creamed. So he had to use, and that's kind of the whole point of the show, is that every time he outsmarted these people was because he used his intellect. He found their weaknesses. He couldn't just beat them with brawn. Like, because that was the whole setup of the opening. There's like that whole red herring of like when he buys the gun and you think it's going to be, oh, he's going to shoot Gus and at some point, but then he never ends up using that gun on Gus at all. That was just brilliant on the writer's part.
Yeah, I really love that sequence too, because from the other end, from Gus's point of view, Gus is basically like a machine, right? He makes no mistakes, aside from the general mistake of hiring Walt, but he nothing he does is ever incorrect. He's always thinking 10 steps ahead. Unlike Walt, he's willing to put his pride and ego aside in order to get it done. But the one flaw he has, the one mistake he makes, is the thing that makes him human, which was his love for Max and his desire for revenge against Hector. And that one human desire is the thing that gets him killed. Because if he sent Tyrus to go do it, like to go kill that guy, like Tyrus suggested, Gus walks away. He never dies. But because he needs that personal revenge against Hector, it's his one flaw, but it's the one thing that makes him like a real person. Um, and I absolutely love the again the character design that goes behind that. And I thought that was very satisfying from looking at Gus's character. I thought that was a great moment.
Absolutely. But yeah, just to, because we always get off on Breaking Bad, but yeah, I actually can't think of shows like it's funny because I'm rewatching it and I'm realizing how much The Shield has held up in terms of just how brazen it is in terms of showing cops, and even it, there are times when the show seems to um what's it called, Boys in Blue, or the Brotherhood in
Oh,
Blue.
thin blue line.
Yeah, the sort of idea that like a lot of There's a lot of moments in the show where the cops are like, "Hey, don't rat on your fellow cops because that's not what we do." But it's never presented in like a honorable way. It's almost presented in, and at the time it might sound like it because I think like the cops actually believe it. But then the show always goes to great lengths to flip it on its head and to by the final season, every single person is like turning on each other and very similar to Sopranos, where in the first couple seasons, you almost buy into this idea of like brotherhood and like we're a family. But then by the end, you're like, you realize this is all bullshit. These are just a bunch of dudes just cosplaying gangsters who watch. These are like old dudes who you know have cancer and have watched The Godfather too many times and think they're still playing like these roles. When in reality, it's all just kind of a farce.
Yeah, I mean that was a big thing in The Sopranos too. That like the codes of loyalty that a lot of these like the mafia claims to have in itself is really bullshit, right? It's
Yeah,
just a way for those in power ironically to maintain their power, which a criticism a lot of people have of like modern society, like a lot of our kind of um uh like our cultural ideas are actually just systems in place to keep us like obedient to our leaders, right? Of like, do as you're told and salute the flag and all that kind of stuff. And so people cynically look at that as like, what does that help mean? It doesn't really help me with anything. It kind of helps, the people in power more than anything else. And then people argue that like, well, helping them is helping you because they maintain stability and peace and all this kind of stuff. So, it's one of those things when like when it's working, but when it's not. So it's like having loyalty to your compatriots or whatever is great when they have loyalty to you, but when they're like full of shit and they're willing to sell you down the river, like it's like the prisoner's dilemma, right? You're the last one holding the bag. You're gonna get screwed over.
yeah, and it's funny that like what's frustrating about that because I hear that sentiment a lot with like current day like masculinity gurus who are like, oh man, modernity is terrible. Like we have to go back to like traditional masculinity back when there was honor and respect and yada yada yada. And it's like all these guys, like you guys are operating on an incredibly romanticized version of
Yeah,
what you think the past was like.
yeah.
Like even like I think they even said that what didn't the mob like when The Godfather the novel came out. I think they said the mob liked it because it
Oh, they
made
loved
them
it.
look fucking cool.
Oh,
And
they
like they
loved
were
it.
like, yeah, they were like, we were not this cool, man. We were not like this, like, it's like, oh, we're all wearing like it's all like romanticized with the
Yeah.
music and like the suits and the lighting, and it's like no, a lot of these guys were just kind of like they were playing dress up most of the time. They
That
kind of had like this air of like self importance, like, hey, we're the big men, and it's like,
Well, the mafia is like anything else, where it's like, are there people in there who are like kingpins, who are like bad, like badasses? Yeah, absolutely. But the average mafioso is like just barely getting by. They did a documentary on this called "The Real Sopranos" that talked a lot about this. You've got guys like the Tony Sopranos who are like, yeah, they're living in mansions, but the average guy is basically just like, oh damn, like what, I gotta like rob an old lady today to get my money from my boss, or like I'm gonna get fucking whacked. Like they're just barely scraping by. And it's the same thing too with like, you look at like any profession, right? Like the Silicon Valley types, there's the billionaire CEO at the top, but then there's the guy who's working customer support, who's making a decent living, but not not everyone's a fucking kingpin.
yeah. It's funny too because even The Godfather, for all of its charges of romanticism of the mob life, and I think to some extent it does. I think just from like a purely cinematic, you know, the cinematic power that the film has, it's hard not to kind of get swept up in it. But what I always thought was interesting was that there's one line, or like one of the famous lines from the film, is when Pacino, Michael, is trying to convince Sonny and Tom to let him kill McCluskey and Salazzo, and he tells Sonny, see, it's not personable, Sonny. It's strictly business. And what I always got from that line, and I never really recognized it until later, was that I almost think the movie is like one big subversion in the sense of like on the surface, it's like this movie of like, it's very romanticized and like all the characters are speaking of honor and code and loyalty. And yet, when that one line, like it's nothing personal, it's just business, every single thing in the movie is personal. Every single thing that happens in the movie is like there is a personal stake in it. So like this idea that it's like, oh, it's just business. It's like, no, it's not. It never is just business. There's like it's all these egos rolling around. Like yeah, this I in like again Sopranos or even Goodfellas before Sopranos, it really dressed that down in a much more blunt way. But I almost think The Godfather in many ways was almost like doing it by even part two when Fredo ends up betraying Michael. There's the big scene where Michael confronts him, and Fredo, he's like, you were my younger brother, and I always stepped over. It was all personal. It was never just, oh, it's just business. Like, no. Oh, and then in part two, the reason Hyman Roth decides to betray Michael is because Michael had Mo Green killed in part one, and that wasn't because that wasn't for business. He got pissed off that Mo Green was, giving him lip when he wanted to buy out the casino and it wouldn't let him. So yeah, it's all this, but yet people still romanticize this idea that like, oh yeah, there was back when there was honor and respect. And it's like, I don't really think it existed to the extent that you think it does. You only think it does because you've been, as you put it, you've almost been like indoctrinated by this propaganda that made you think that like, oh yeah, it used to be great. And it's like, no, not really.
I think honor and respect do exist today, and they did exist in the past, but usually when it exists with like the common people more than like the
Mm-hmm.
leaders
It's a
themselves.
good
Like I
point.
watched this documentary about the samurai. Now there's this kind of idea that the samurai, they had honor, they were bushido, like they were, great noble warriors. But I watched a documentary about, the Civil War period that Japan was going through at the time, and like all the leaders were scumbags, just constantly like betraying each other, breaking oaths, assassinating each other. They were really like not living up to the codes of honor that they were supposed to, be a part of. Now, funny enough, in the documentary, the ninja, the shinobi, who kind of have a reputation for being sneaky and like deceptive and all this kind of stuff. Funny enough, there's more documented cases of them like obeying like their oaths, like even unto death, like fighting to the death for their oaths. That's kind of, again, it's funny that like, again, the lower classes tend to have that more, again, maybe because they believe the propaganda more and so they abide by it. But those in power know that like, yeah, no, you just do what you have to do to get ahead. That's, and that's like Carcetti in season 3 of The Wire, or 4 of The Wire. It's like you can have ideals, but when push comes to shove, you do what you got to do to survive for your own sake. And I think that's how it goes with any kind of social system.
And you could even make the argument that part of the reason that these people made it to these positions of leaders is because, especially like in stuff like when it comes to like organized crime or business, part of the reason they were able to get to these positions is because they didn't have honor, and they were like cutthroat. They stepped on anyone and everyone they needed to. They played every sort of dirty trick in the book in order to get to the top position. And it perfectly fits in with the Shield, because at the beginning you almost get sucked into like Vic's ideology of like, it's for the greater good. You know, we're a brotherhood, the strike team, where we look out for each other. But as the show goes on, you start to realize that like Vic is just a massive hypocrite in the sense that he basically does whatever he wants, and then he like post hocs, like then he like retroactively um like justifies it. It's like, oh, we had to do this for this, even if it completely contradicts something he did last season. And by the end of the season, he's like going rogue. He's just like doing all this stuff that is he's doing stuff that he killed other people for doing 2 seasons ago. And yet he's still able, like, oh no, that was different. And it's like, wait a minute, hang on. Wait a minute here.
And I don't like want to be like so cynical where like I don't believe in anything kind of shit. Like I do believe in a lot of like social customs and social norms that I think are beneficial for a lot of us to choose to live by. But you have to believe in those things, but also open your eyes to like reality. Like you can believe in honor, you can believe in responsibility and respect and all this kind of stuff, but don't just blindly believe that the other people who are talking like that are living that way. Judge their actions by like what is actually going on here. But I do think it's good to have like it's like Omar fucking says, right? It's like a man gotta have a code, right? It's
Yeah.
good to have something to ground yourself in morally by, and try to live your life by that way. I want to. I know we're coming up on our hour here, and I know you wanted to talk about it. I I wanted to bring up the House of the Dragon finale, which we've both been watching as it's been coming out. I've been doing my reactions to it. What are your thoughts on the finale, and maybe your thoughts on the whole season?
I could probably have to give the whole season a rewatch, just because I kind of forgot, or I kind of took for granted, um, the experience of watching a show week to week, especially with the time jumps and like the new and the castings. I think I'm going to enjoy it a lot more on a second watch when I binge it. Just because there are a lot of names, there's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of time jumps. So week to week, you almost, even with like the last time on, it never really sufficiently, gives you the full picture. Um, but overall, I think the second half of the season was superior than the first. Um, the I I I probably wouldn't put it above season one of the OG Game of Thrones. I think it definitely falls somewhere. I think it was superior than the back half of Game of Thrones. Um, and the finale, a lot of people were actually upset with the changes made from the source material. However, there's some speculation about that, given the point of view that the source material is told from. But I think most of the changes were, from at least from what I saw, were fine. And what pisses me off so much is that I think that they set up Rhaenyra's dark turn in a single episode. They set up Rhaenyra's dark turn way better than the writers did in for Daenerys in an entire like 3 seasons, which is like so. What the like? What? How do you even do that? Like, oh my god.
I agree. I thought this season for the most part was very good. I thought it was very well made. There's nothing that was like glaringly like like season 8 of Game of Thrones where I was like that's shit writing. It's been very good. It's a very well made show. I will say again, maybe it's because of the time jumps, maybe it's because of all this kind of stuff where I've had a little bit of a hard time grounding myself in the story in a way that like the first season of Game of Thrones did. And it seems like we're over the time jumps now. Now it's going to be more like, you know, straight through, which again, I'm really excited about the second season because I think without those elements, it might be a little bit easier for me to follow the story. I do know the story because I've read the books, but there were some of those changes bothered me, to be honest. Not any to the point where I was like, I hate this. But I like the quintessential one that everyone's talking about, right, is the last sequence of the episode. Really, really well done sequence when Vagar is chasing Lucerys.
That was horrifying. Oh my god.
Incredible. The That might be the best sequence Game of Thrones has ever done. Like even better than like Watchers on the Wall in season 4 of Game of Thrones. That was like the pacing, like the shadows, how they use the storm and everything. So fucking incredible. But I really don't like that they made it so that like Aemond like basically lost control of Vagar, and that's why he ate Lucerys. I've heard the arguments. I've heard them. People say that like the history is unreliable, and I understand that like I think they were trying to make Aemond a little bit more sympathetic, but for me, it was a little bit like the Red Wedding. But instead of having them stab uh, Robb Stark's wife, they just accidentally kind of trip and like the knife goes into her. I felt like we lost some of the tension and some of the like the impact that sequence would have had if they just made it so that Aemond was like, "I'm gonna fucking eat you." And we can argue that back and forth, but I do really really like the sequence. I just felt like that one element. I was like, ooh, you kind of missed the landing there a little bit.
Well, it's hard because I'm torn. So yeah, like the sequence itself is what I loved about the sequence was the fact that that one shot of how they showed how much bigger Vagar was
Huge in the
fun. That was
distance is
fun.
incredible.
You're just like horrified. I what I loved about that sequence was they really showed, or at least I got the sense, something I had never felt even in Game of Thrones. They really showed how vulnerable. Like you think like, oh, I'm a dragon rider, I'm flying in the air. But in that scene when you're like in Luke's shoes, you really felt just how vulnerable it felt to be up there and to be in this atmosphere. And it was like it just gave me a very like uneasy feeling, even though like this is like one of like the 12 people on earth who is like ridden a dragon. Like you must be like a master, and it's like no, you're just a scared shitless kid. Yeah, it's hard because I'm torn. On one end, they really built Aemon up as such a bastard. Like they gave him like no redeeming qualities whatsoever. At like we had like no hint that he was anything but like a ruthless, like psychotic bastard at all. And then in that final moment, they're like, "Wait, no." So that kind of did feel a little bit strange. I was like, it didn't seem like that's just something he would do. However, I am so a couple things. One, I really like the fact that even though it was an accident, no one's going to believe it. Even his own mother is not. So I kind of do like that irony that the worst thing that he's ever going to do and be remembered by was not the thing that he meant to do. I kind of do like that. Two, I do like the idea of playing with perspective in the sense of the way, because the like you mentioned it and I mentioned it, the way the Fire and Blood is written is that it's almost like recounting history. So this is how this event was remembered, but this is not what actually happened. Same thing with Alicent, of how I think in the books it's strongly implied or people believe that she murdered Viserys, whereas in the show that is not the case. That's one change I like too. The tragic irony of the fact that Alicent, I don't agree with her still. I am not Team Green. However, I do feel bad that she sincerely does believe that Viserys wanted Aegon to sit the throne. In her head, she truly believes that. And lastly, and this might be, and like this could go either way because this is what you were saying. I think breaking the illusion of the riders being able to control the dragons fully, I on one hand I really like it in the sense of like I think it adds such another layer to the story of like, hey, all these things that happened are like these like dragon riders, and it's like kind of going back to what we were talking about, like, oh, this like romanticized, they're fighting in the sky. How much control did these people actually have? However, on the other hand, to your point, I am kind of worried are will they go too far with it and they'll start kind of like all these very decisive battles on Dragonback where they just flukes. And I kind of and like a little bit of that could be okay, but I'm kind of worried they might go too far
Too
with it.
much, yeah. See, I felt Eamon was sympathetic. We got that scene of him like him getting bullied by the Valarians and his older brother Aegon. By the way, so fucking weird the casting choices they made for the older Aegon, where he looks younger than Aemon, he's
Okay.
shorter than Aemon.
Thank you. Thank you. We were like, wait a minute, Aemond is younger
So
than Aegon. We
weird,
were like,
so
what?
weird. like, I don't know why the first pairing of Aemond and Aegon looked way better. I don't. It's almost like they flipped the actors a little bit, but regardless of that, I felt a lot of sympathy for Aegon and being like him being bullied by his brothers, him getting his eye taken out by Lucerys. I felt like his anger towards him was justified to the point where it was like, even if he killed Lucerys out of like anger, I would be like, I don't agree with you, but I get it. I get how you've been stewing on the fact that your eye is gone for 5 years or whatever. Also, those Velaryon boys look way too fucking young for like the amount of time that's supposed to have passed. Like Aemond went from little boy to grown ass fucking man, and Lucerys went from little boy
Yeah.
to slightly old. That's what I'm saying. Those casting choices are
That
weird,
was,
but
and I wonder if that was done to try to, because like, so it makes it seem like, because that, I think you're right in the sense that if they really built up Aemond as like this like broody, like nerdy loser who like is like tired of getting like bullied and stuff like that, I think it would have like his actions would have been seen more as like, okay, this is like a kid who's been bullied acting out. He's not right. He's an idiot, but he at least like you understand it. But one, they made him look so sociopathic. The actor, for all of the credit, he does a great job of portraying that, but I don't know if it was the best portrayal to go with if you're trying to make him more sympathetic, because you're like, you can't make him look like the fucking Hannibal Lecter esque like vibe to him where he's just like dripping with sociopath. But then also in the last minute, actually, you kind of have to like, it was an accident. And it's like, But then also the point you made is that it, because Lucerys was so young looking, it made it feel a lot more like this grown ass man was like bullying this like 12-year-old kid, and it was like, what?
and again, I'm gonna be honest, man. I'm a little bit Team Green, from what I've read in the books and stuff, because people give all this shit to like Aemon and stuff being like a sociopath or whatever. What about fucking Daemon? Like Daemon is George R. R. Martin's like favorite Targaryen. He's like his boy or whatever. He does way more reprehensible evil shit, and he's a grown ass fucking man. But it's okay because Matt Smith is kind of sexy, so it's like, I guess fine. That's why I don't have a lot of sympathy for the black side, the black faction, because it's like everyone's like, oh yeah, the Greens are so awful with what they fucking did. What about what Rhaenyra did, like killing Laenor? I know she doesn't fucking technically kill him in this one, which pisses me off too. That change, but it's like both sides are awful, and I do think they showed that to an extent, but like the books also definitely play up the green side as way more worse than the black side too, when in reality in my mind they're both pretty awful sides.
Well, I think, at least in my opinion, I am team. So right now, what I've liked is the show has done, at least in my eyes, for both Rhaenyra and Allison. I am sort of like neutral on them both right now. I think like the Rhaenyra pull a lot of shit and like, fuck around a lot. Yes, but like I was like, personally, I was like, yeah, like I kind of had the attitude of like, yeah, fuck yeah, bitch, like fuck those bitches. It's like, oh, the land succession, and she was just kind of like, fuck it, we're the royalty, we can do as we want. Was it irresponsible? Absolutely, but like I kind of respected it. And then with Allison, even with Allison, the fact that like, for me, it's what pisses me off, and this is kind of why I'm kind of, I'm not like a fan of Damon. Like, if he ends up like getting croaked, if he ends up croaking, like he's gonna completely deserve it. However, I think part of the reason people can still like him is because he doesn't have, there isn't this like self-righteous vibe where it's like the show is like, hey, Damon is like a bastard, he is a son of a bitch, he's done these very very horrible things, but like it recognizes that like, this is like, that's who the character is, this is what he's done. For me, and this is what pissed me off about Allison when like an episode like 6 or 7, was that she kept like talking about, it's like, oh no, I'm against Rhaenyra, because she goes against our customs and she doesn't respect the duty and responsibility. When it was clearly like that wasn't really what she was pissed about. Like she was very resentful of Rhaenyra, the fact that she had the freedom to just do whatever she wanted and just like have no repercussions for her actions, which to be fair she probably should have. And like so to some extent her resentment of Rhaenyra I think was justified a bit, but because it was coming from a place of like that line when she's like, where's duty, where's sacrifice, it's like, bitch, I don't like, you kind of like got pimped up by your dad, that's what you're mad at. And that was the big thing in that scene after Viserys' death, where Alicent like breaks the news, like, oh my god. And like that's why I think that change is good, in the sense of I feel for Alicent because at least she in her head truly believes that Viserys truly did want Aegon to sit on the throne. So I do sympathize with that. Everyone else, though, Otto, who have been planning this overthrow for like literally the last like decade, they can all fucking die. Like that pissed me off. The fact that they have been like, oh, we're all about the customs and this is, when in reality, like they've just been trying to get power this whole time. And I'm like, fuck you guys.
Yeah. No, definitely. Like both sides really are awful and the things they deal with. You're right. Alicent has sympathy. I do have sympathy for Rhaenyra to an extent too, and other characters, on either side. Um, but yeah, to me, both sides really don't deserve the throne after everything they've done. And knowing what we know about where the story goes, that's actually probably intentional. And we'll see it play out, which is I won't spoil it because people get pissed when I talk about book spoilers. Even though it's out there, even in Game of Thrones, they reference what happens to Rhaenyra in one of the episodes. Like Joffrey
That was
says,
so. I told my girlfriend, and she's like, "What? They just like tell you the ending?" And I'm like, "Yeah, because they
well,
didn't
because
think
it's
they were
it's
gonna."
history. Well, no, even like you're supposed to go into it knowing what happens. Like even when you read the books, like if you read the Game of Thrones, like the lot, like you can look at the line of kings of who takes over. You're supposed to know. There's this element of dramatic irony to the story where it's like we know these characters are going to fail in what they do. We're just watching it play out, and that's why I don't think spoilers really matter. It's about the journey of how we get there.
That's sort of why I don't really care when like that's why like when we talk about like Danny burning King's Landing in the books, like it's not meant to be this like surprise. I think even in
No,
the books, it's like it's kind of clear
it's
what it's
hinted
building
at.
up to. Yeah,
It's hinted at. Yeah,
but it's about how does it unfold? What happens?
exactly.
And something else, just like last thing that I really wanted to mention, because people were upset about this, but I actually liked it. So in the books, after the Greens, after Viserys' death, and the Greens, they take the throne and place
Hmm.
Aegon. In the book, Rhaenyra is like, okay, like, okay, fuck it, we're going to war. This is off.
Yeah,
What I really liked about um, the show was that they showed a little bit of hesitance on Rhaenyra's part,
yeah,
where there almost was a moment where you kind of thought where she was like, maybe the best thing to do is to step away,
yeah,
because Emma D'Arcy, in an interview they gave, they said, like, what Emma said was that Rhaenyra doesn't, in their mind, it's like Rhaenyra doesn't really necessarily want the throne. It's more about the symbolism of having agency. That's
yeah,
more about what it's about, and it's about her father. It really isn't about the throne.
yeah,
And I really like that detail in the show, where it almost for a second there was a moment there where Rhaenyra was like, you know what, we've been through so much crap, and the book page that Allison like kept,
yeah,
there was a moment where I truly thought that, like, hey, maybe she might step aside, just put an end to this and just be
yeah.
done with it. But after that was the thing. I almost thought Allison should have gone to Dragonstone instead of
Mhm.
Otto. I think if Allison went to Dragonstone instead of
Yeah,
Otto, things would have played out differently. But at the end, and that's what makes it so like tragically ironic. At the end of that episode, when Rhaenyra turns and looks at the camera, any semblance of like peace is just gone.
Yeah.
It's like fucking on, and it's just
Yeah.
like I don't think she's gonna be even recognizable in season 2. She's gonna go fucking ape shit.
All I'm gonna say to that is blood and cheese.
Hell yeah.
So we'll see that in season 2. But I know we're past our hour here. Thank you guys for listening to this. It's been awesome as always to talk with you, Mac. Like, I enjoy these conversations, even though we jump around a lot to a bunch of different stuff. To me, it's interesting. Like, we've got some like interesting analysis to talk about, or just chatting about our lives as always. So I hope it's been enjoyable to you, the audience, and stay tuned for the next episode of No One's a Critic, coming soon.
Take care, and can't wait for your El Camino vid.
Nice. Monday, October 31st. Watch it.
Let's
Although
go.
this video might come out after, we'll see. But regardless,
Yeah.
hopefully you enjoyed it.
You'll enjoy it either way. So
All right,
enjoy.
so thank you and have a good night.